welcome all of you to this panel discussion. My name is Bart Gordon. I just retired, or you might say graduated, from the United States Congress last year, where, among other things, I was chairman of the Science and Technology Committee and was the author of the authorizing language for the American Competes Act, which was the basis for ARPA-E. So welcome to all of you here. The key question for this panel is, what skill sets will be required for the future U.S. economy, and how can we ensure that our workforce can meet these needs? Now, let me also go over our ground rules. Ground rules are that I'm going to ask each of these distinguished panelists a question to get things started. We'll probably then have a second round to vet out some of the issues that came up, and then we're going to go to you. And we want to hear any questions that you might have. You can put those questions forth in two ways. One is by looking at your Twitter address up here, and then we have a Twitster down there that will let us know what's going on. Or you can do it as a live, real person. And we have a microphone back there, and I have been told to ask you to try to limit your questions to about 30 seconds. And to set the stage, let me point out, I think it was about 6 weeks ago, that it was estimated that the 7 billionth person was born on Earth. And of those 7 billion people, half that are working make less than $2 a day. And so clearly we do not want to have to compete on wages. And we can't compete on wages. So we've got to be an innovative country, an innovative nation with bringing forth new innovative services and products. And to do that, you have to have a workforce that can work at that value-added level for services and products. And let me quote a statement from the Job Council that I saw here. And that it is that the lack of alignment between employers' need and what the skills are taught and delivered has become a critical problem for U.S. competitiveness. You know, I think it's a bit ironic. How many of you are from the Washington area? Raise your hand. Well, congratulations to the rest of you then. You know, I think it's only Washington that the President of the United States can be criticized for suggesting that all Americans should try to get education beyond high school. But that's somewhat the environment we live in now, and so we're going to talk about some of those issues. The panelists' deeper resumes are in the program, and so rather than take time there, I'm just going to introduce them as to their current position, and I'll start on my left with Deborah Wince-Smith. Deborah is the chairman and CEO of the Council of Competitiveness. I'm a great fan of their work and have seen it firsthand. I am a fellow there. And it's very interesting. The Council of Competitiveness is a place where CEOs of large companies, small companies, academics, as well as labor come together to share ideas and hope to find solutions. And so, Deborah, from that sort of platform of everything, you know, what are they telling you about the types of skills that are needed, and what are their concerns?
Thank you, Bart. And let me just say, you know, kind of an overarching comment that competitiveness, which is such a buzzword right now in our country, and importantly so, really is defined as how, as a country, we increase our productivity, we maintain a high standard of living for all our citizens, and we can succeed globally. And all of those three metrics of success depend on people. And so what we're really hearing from our members of the U.S. Council on Competitiveness, particularly as it relates to manufacturing, is that talent is number one in terms of where they are locating next generation infrastructure, where they are making investments in innovative technology development, and where they're also seeing some game-changing investments at a national level in infrastructure. So the talent question cuts across all of that. I thought, I just might mention that, over the last couple years, we've done a major study looking at the manufacturing extended enterprise, which includes everything from core ideas, the research, logistics, supply chain, the use of, tremendous transformational technologies that we're developing, as well as capital costs, regulatory issues. And we did with Deloitte the first ever global CEO survey that asked CEOs all around the world, why are you putting next generation infrastructure in particular countries and what are the issues? And again, at the top of the list, whether it was the U.S., China, India, Brazil, it was people. Wages had nothing to do with it. And the issue was, where are you going to find the most innovative people that can really respond to this challenge? So we kind of followed that up last year with a series of reports called Ignite 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, looking at what CEOs are saying, what university presidents and lab directors are saying, as well as what labor's saying. And the skills that were really highlighted are the skills that require critical thinking, a lot of infusion of core STEM capabilities, as well as judgment and insight and creativity that really comes from an educational framework that includes what many would call the soft sciences, the arts, humanities, social sciences. And this is even true, for skilled workers in an advanced manufacturing facility. I'll just share an example. We were down last summer in Chattanooga, and Tennessee's got some incredible examples of how the state, the universities, the companies in that region have really come together to put some very advanced manufacturing in place. And the workforce has been developed to deal with that. And at the Alstom plant, where they make now their largest power generators in the world, in fact, one of these power generators can provide energy for San Francisco, I was told. Just to do the welding alone takes a 2-year training program. And similarly at the Volkswagen plant, how they're training their workforce, working with the community colleges, the schematics, all of the training is such that it's taking us away from the mid-20th century model of standardized, routine, commoditized skills. So that's really what we need to talk about, is how we move forward so we have a human resource base in this country that can compete with, everybody around the world. I want to share one little anecdote, Bart. When I was out in the hall, a very nice young man came up to me and said, well, I went to West Point because I have a Naval Academy pin on. So we got talking, and he said, I said, I'm going to be on this panel. And he said, well, one of the things they're not talking about really in this conference, a lot on technology, and of course technology and manufacturing, we'll talk about that, I hope. He said, but nobody's really talking about leadership. And I thought that was very interesting. So I said, well, take that a little further. So he said, well, I'm going to share with you the 4 soft truths for special forces. I said, all right, what are they? Well, I'm going to share them with you. They are absolutely what we're talking about. Okay, the 4 soft truths. Humans are more important than hardware. This is for our SEALs and Rangers and people like that. Quality is better than quantity. Special forces cannot be mass-produced. Well, we know that's certainly true for our workforce. And competent special operations, human beings, cannot be created after emergencies or challenges or competition occurs. So, you think about that. Everything we're dealing with really comes back to people and how we train and educate and give them the opportunities to participate in the front line. And the last thing I want to say is the labor unions are a very important partner in this challenge. The pipe fitters and plumbers union that has about 400,000 members in the U.S. and Canada, they have one of the most advanced training facilities in the world outside of Chicago, where they're training journeymen, welders. These are people who put in the complexities of pipes, very sophisticated infrastructure. They're bringing that training now to our military bases, and it's becoming a model that's replicating through the country. So we really have to think of these partnerships, working with the employers, identifying the skills for the future, and bringing the whole contingent of players into the equation.
Thank you, Deborah. So you will approve now. Deborah has 2 sons at the Naval Academy, so for her to quote someone from West Point really was a stretch, but it makes me feel better about her national security. Next, we had Stefan Heck. Stefan is the leader of the McKinsey Global Cleantech practice, and we were talking before, and I said, "Are you going to tell us a little bit about your survey?" And he said, "Which one?" So they have been very busy. So we'll talk a little bit about the employment and job survey.
Yeah, so I'll start with that. We took a look over the last 6 months or so at what the job situation is in the U.S., and what you find is this downturn has been steeper in terms of the job reductions than any that's gone before, and the recovery rate in terms of getting jobs back has been slower than we've ever seen. So if you just do the forward projection, we have about 5 more years to go before we're back into positive jobs territory. We're a little bit ahead of that now relative to 3 months ago when the report came out, but it's still the longest jobless recovery that the U.S. has ever seen. And there's a number of structural factors that have changed that we kind of missed because we were very focused on the immediate emergency of the downturn, but that have actually been creeping in over the last 20 years. Our labor mobility has gone down. We used to have a huge advantage relative to the rest of the world where people moved on average once in 5 years. Now it's gone down to half of what it used to be. So people are locked into homes that are underwater, don't have the resources to even move to a different state, don't have the education to find a new job, and that's really been a big hit. At the same time, we have a massive mismatch between the people looking for work and the kinds of skills that we need for the jobs out there. So at the same time that we have record unemployment, we actually have 40% of companies saying they've had positions open that they can't find people for because no one meets the qualifications. How do you reconcile that? 40% of companies are looking for people, and yet we've got millions of people out of work. The answer is it's a mismatch of the skill sets. Because if you look at the unemployment rate for college educated, for graduate school educated, the unemployment rate is less than half, in some cases even a third, of what it is for the general population. And if you look at high school dropouts, unemployment is almost double what it is for the average population. So that tells you there's an issue there in terms of the skill sets and who's able to find work. And we are tying into manufacturing. We've lost the very simple kind of manufacturing that's, assembly line, repeat work, right? That's now being done by hundreds of $2 an hour laborers in China and Vietnam and Southeast Asia. And in the future, actually, we see a big dynamic of even Africa coming online as the next big labor pool where people are looking for very, very low wages. What we have to shift to is the kind of manufacturing that involves technology, involves automation, involves engineering skill sets, involves more complicated kinds of tasks. The welding example that you gave is a very good one. And there are quite a few companies that actually still make products in the U.S., but it tends to be things that aren't just screwed together and bolted together. It's things that actually require design, require looking at 3D CAD drawings, require particular skills to make sure the quality is high. I'll give you one example, which is that a lot of jet engines and rocket engines are still made in the U.S. You could argue for the defense side that's because of security concerns, but even the commercial side, to make a jet engine takes very, very precise tolerances, very exact machining, very high quality of the materials used, very fine control over the temperature cycle that product goes through as it's being manufactured. So that's a very, very advanced manufacturing skill that isn't going to go to another country just because you have cheaper labor. I spent a lot of time in my career at McKinsey serving semiconductor companies, and you look at semiconductor manufacturing, a portion of that has gone overseas, but a lot of it's still in the U.S. as well. And most people think it's gone overseas because of labor. Actually, labor is 2% of the production cost of a semiconductor chip. The rest is all capital equipment and automated machines. It's made by robots today, and there's really no reason why we couldn't make chips by robots here in this country. The real reason is it's gotten so expensive to build these factories that U.S. companies aren't putting up that level of capital. Again, Intel and IBM and a few accepted. But by and large, we have lost that industry because they haven't been willing to make the investments, not because labor actually has been more affordable elsewhere. We also have cut ourselves off in the last decade or so from the best talent pool that we used to get from immigration. I think if any of you were in the previous panel, people said everybody who comes to graduate school and wants to stay here, we should give them a visa to come. Most of you probably can't tell, but I'm an immigrant. I grew up in Austria. I learned English as a second language, but I don't have an accent the way that Arnold Schwarzenegger has. So I can't entertain you that same way. But I stayed after graduate school. I think if I had come in the last decade, it would have been a lot harder to actually stay in this country and to become part of the workforce. And I think a lot of it goes back to the very roots. Our education, going all the way back to kindergarten, isn't preparing our children for the kind of careers and futures that they will have. Part of it is what you already mentioned, Deborah, of science and engineering education, which we underemphasize relative to other countries. Part of it's also just the values that we've grown up with. If you think about what role models are today, most kids would tell you it's somebody in Hollywood or some famous celebrity. And if you ask that same question of somebody in Finland, odds are they would actually cite a teacher. And the value of teachers in our society, not only do we underpay them, but we undervalue them for what they are in terms of the respect, in terms of the education, and their moral weight that they carry in terms of guiding people's careers and guiding people's interests. And it's really at that level, intervening all the way back to kindergarten, that we need to change what we're doing to bring the right workforce into the job market. Now, that's a very long-term solution. That's going to take 12, 15, 16 years for that to really take place. So in the near term, it's really going to be a matter of how do we retrain the workforce that's coming out of the jobs that we are losing. Because our analysis says it's not worth fighting a losing battle against industries where labor really is a big component and they're very simple tasks, because you can't, through protectionism or subsidies, maintain that on a long-term basis. Many countries have tried that, and that is a losing strategy. So it's really about reinventing what we do, adding more value, adding more innovation, and competing in areas where we really can compete. A lot of people also think that energy plays a big role. We looked at this. If you really look at the U.S. GDP and you peel apart the onion and you say, okay, which industries have energy as a big fraction of their cost structure and are making things that are actually traded globally? Because some industries are energy intensive, but the stuff is so heavy or so tied to a geography that you can't actually ship it from China to here. You wind up realizing that 8% of the U.S. GDP actually is both energy intensive and trade exposed. So it's not really about energy for the economy as a whole. It's about energy for very specific industries where that matters. So if anybody's arguing for why we can't have environmental controls on our energy system, that's really only relevant for a very small subset of the economy. And then the last point I'll make is languages. I've spent a lot of time in Asia, and regardless of whether you go to Korea or China or India, everybody's trying to learn English. Everybody's trying to get familiar with global commerce. And the number of children now in our education system that are studying Chinese or studying any foreign language, except maybe Spanish, is diminishingly small. And so we're not ready for the kind of global mobility, global workforce that we really need to have that's able to compete at that level. And I think it's really on the education side that we have to pull the fundamental levers, but in the meantime, there's a lot we can do that Deborah's teed up in terms of the actual workforce that's already in the job market.
Thanks, Stefan. Next we have Carrie Houtman, who is the Senior Public Policy Manager of Dow Chemical. And Carrie, somewhat following up on Stefan, another byproduct of the recession has been we're seeing that states are cutting back their funding level for colleges, junior colleges, training of all types, which then it puts companies like yours in a dilemma, in that you're going to have to maybe have some public-private partnerships to work through this if you're not getting them straight out. Dow has been really a leader in that. So what are the lessons learned that you can share with us?
Yeah, look, I think first and foremost, I would probably, reiterate what the other two panelists have said regarding the skills that are required for this new manufacturing workforce. Manufacturing today, as you all know, is drastically different than it was a generation ago. A focus on now worker safety and sustainability and environmental regulations has really driven these stereotypical old school factories into obsolete status, and they've been replaced by high-tech clean room, very innovative factories. But at the heart of all of that for us is our workforce. That's also no surprise to you. In order to meet the complexity of today's manufacturing environment, what we need to see more of is a partnership between educators and business in order to try and better meet business needs. I think there's been a gradual divergence in where business and education have been with regard to kind of meeting each other's needs and moving in lockstep with each other, and I think we really need to get back to that. Look, as a manufacturer, we're looking for these 21st century skills that Deborah mentioned. We're looking for leadership skills first and foremost in a lot of cases, regardless of the job level. It does not matter if you're an entry-level operator in a plant or a lab technologist, all the way up to our vice presidents and our very senior leaders. Folks that work for us need to also be able to communicate very complex ideas in a fast-paced environment. There's also the global flavor for us that you alluded to, and need to be able to solve these very complex issues in a team environment because, frankly, we work in teams, and that's the reality of what we do. In order to develop those skills, we see a very strong STEM tie. We believe that the rigor that's involved and required with the STEM fields really drives towards critical thinking and project leadership and collaborative work. So we believe that you can't have really one without the other. We can't develop these 21st century skills without a real strong tie and a strong focus on STEM education. And we see a lot of pockets where educators are really rising to meet the challenge. They want to partner with businesses. They are looking for active engagement with the business community. And Dow, we do that in a couple of different ways, engage in those partnerships. We do that at the local level. We have some really innovative programs with local community colleges where we've developed in-house training for chemical processors, our solar shingle technologists, and then our battery technicians. And we've essentially developed those curriculum with the local community colleges and then handed that curriculum to them because they are the experts in delivery of the training that our workforce really needs. We do that in conjunction with the other local companies to our sites. Our corporate headquarters is also the corporate headquarters of Dow Corning, which is a big silicone-based chemical company, as well as Hemlock Semiconductor, which is a very high-tech industry of its own. We also have joint ventures with battery technologies and solar shingles and the like, which have brought an exciting challenge to our region on the workforce side. We didn't necessarily have the workforce that could support batteries and chemicals and solar shingles and everything else that was required outside of those, the skilled trades and everything required to build those plants. So we took the approach of partnering with the local community colleges, wrapping those curriculum up with a bow, presenting that opportunity to our community colleges, and they have been excellent partners to us, very flexible, very responsive to industry's needs, and they just have become a really critical cog in the clockwork that becomes our workforce development. The other way that we've engaged in these public-private partnerships, especially over the last year, has been our engagement with the Advanced Manufacturing Partnership. Now, just real quickly, this is a partnership with some of our leading manufacturers in the U.S., biggest manufacturers in the U.S., with university presidents, and then agency representatives from NIST, DOD, DOE, and the like. This partnership has really brought together an interesting mix of groups that I don't think typically work together to look at workforce challenges. And this has really brought to bear some interesting ideas like engagement of veterans in the workforce, which we heard in the previous panel. We've talked a lot about the importance of community colleges in these real local and regional flavor manufacturing environments. We've also talked about the importance of these stackable credentials, which you'll talk about a little bit more detail, as really all critical pieces, working pieces in a very complex puzzle that is workforce development. And I guess I'll just end by saying that Dow does not believe that the challenges in workforce development and the challenges in the education system should be laid solely at the doorstep of our educators. We believe that that's fundamentally the wrong construct. It needs to be a shared partnership and a shared commitment going forward that businesses engage with our educators in order to articulate what we need, be flexible with our partners, build those relationships locally in order to support the local workforce. And we see that at all levels. It's not just tied to community colleges. It really ranges from kindergarten and early stage reading readiness all the way to our K-20 graduate students. We believe that really it's not a fair nor an accurate assessment to lay this at the doorstep of our education system, and that it really needs to be an all-hands-on-deck approach in order to see a sustainable improvement in not only the education system but in workforce development going forward.
Thank you. Thank you, Carrie. Now we have Ton-Quinlivan. Von is the Vice Chancellor for Workforce and Economic Development for the California Community Colleges. And as was mentioned earlier, we were talking earlier, and she was mentioning stackable credentials. And so tell us, what is stackable credentials, and how does that help close the skill gap with our workforce now?
Yes, I'm going to tell you use the decoder ring to decode between what private sector needs and what education is going to produce. But before I share that, I just wanted to give you a little bit of my background. Before I came to this current role in the community colleges, I actually headed up workforce development in an energy and utility company, and my company was recognized as a best practice model in the industry. And my focus there was to get the right people with the right skills at the right time, the right people with the right skills at the right time. And we worked with 4-year institutions, 2-year institutions, like the community colleges as well as high school, to tackle this talent issue. And so stackable credentials is the phrase that you will want to use in order to bridge what you need versus what education can produce. And it's a very simple concept, which is to modularize education and training so that you can get the right skills at the right time. So let me give you some examples. In my prior role, we had 42 companies over in California, all struggling with energy efficiency market. They said we needed pre-sales engineers and post-sales engineers, and our problem is that our folks had siloed knowledge of the domains of knowledge, and where the market is going to is one of integration. So the folks would know, and my company's employees would know, for example, demand management, solar, energy efficiency, rates. But where the market was going is the integration of all those domains of knowledge. So that knowledge base didn't exist, and it prevented the companies from actually being able to cultivate the market. So what we did was we requested from the universities who came in and said, oh, we have master's programs for you. No, nobody needs a master's at this moment. That is not what they want. What they need is a stackable credential, and each stack represents market value for your immediate supervisor or your own career. So what they ended up creating was a 4-course certificate that would take somebody with a BA, with a STEM-based BA, and stack it with these 4 courses so that they would become a pre-sales engineers. And then, if you stacked it with a project management and engineering project management, another 4-course certificate, you would be able to get a post-sales engineer, because now that person can actually implement the project that they just sold. And then, if you happen to be interested, you can do just 2 more courses, and you'd actually have a master's. So the concept is that instead of having to ask someone at this moment in time to commit to the master's, you're committing to shorter-term stacks. And this is it's a way that both industry and education can understand how to structure skills. Earlier, we also heard conversation about welding, for example, and it's in the plethora of middle skills jobs. And you can also stack at the middle skills. So, for example, there was a community college that offered a 2-year certificate. Well, people were getting hired at the 1-year point. So what they did was restructure to a 1-year certificate and also offer the 2-year AA option. When my company came in, we realized that wasn't enough. For our industry, we need a very specialized set of welding. So then we added up a summer capstone on top of that, a stack on top of that. And so a subset of people who were interested in the industry did the 1 year and then stacked the summer capstone. So it's essentially modularizing education and training so that it's much more digestible, but also more real-time in terms of being able to create the right skills at the right time.
You know, the first thing that came to my mind when it was stackable skills was continuing education. That the skills you might need today, you would need something different as the market changed or later. I mean, how much of this is stacking for the just-in-time job of today versus that continuing education, so that you go back in 3 or 4 years or 10 years, whatever it might be, for another layer?
Oh, I can give you 2 examples, one at the high end and one at the entry level. So we had created as an industry a 1-year certificate in electrical and power line systems. And it was targeted at middle skill, sort of the community college to middle skill layer. So we were surprised to find quite a few engineers coming back. And in the traditional world, you think, okay, you get your engineering degree, your STEM degree, and then you're fine, live a happy life for the rest of your life. But what it turned out was, in the 4 years of getting your engineering BA or BS, 1 year is a specialty, and that 1 year was no longer relevant. So they needed to come back and restack that 1 year. And then these individuals all went off and repurposed themselves. They were able to get into the refinery, the energy, the food processing industry on their own once they got the new skills. Now, at the entry level, here's a good example of what you're talking about. For a lot of our communities, someone may want to compete for an apprenticeship, so they may start in a pre-apprenticeship program at a community college. Then they go into the company where they undergo an apprenticeship training and earn a journeyman card, which is a wonderful portable credential that can move you anywhere, like an electrical tech, for example. Let's say 10 years later, that individual wants to go and be a supervisor, right, a first-line supervisor. Well, they need to have more budget skills, more supervisory skills, et cetera, planning skills, and that's a wonderful time for them to come back and get an AA, like in construction management, for example. Now, let's say 20 years later, what we saw at my company, in a lot of these trades, the body doesn't keep up as you want it to. So let's say these individuals want to change career. Well, maybe they want to take their AA now and stack to a BA so that they can become instructors in classrooms, to come back into the classroom, for example, and teach the trades. And right now, we actually have a shortage for faculty and high school instructors who can teach the trades because they don't have the requisite level of skill. So I think what you've been outlining is that it's no longer the conception of you finish your school and you're done. The reality of work these days is that you just keep having to stack and restack. And there's different levels of public, private, and personal investment depending on the junction phase of your life.
You raised the issue there that I wanted to discuss. Again, if you go back to the origin of the ARPA-E, it was a part of a recommendation from the National Academies. In 2005, three others and myself asked the National Academies to do a report on competitiveness in America in the 21st century. They made a variety of recommendations, ARPA-E again being one. In the education area, it was really startling. And at that time, I don't think it's changed that much. At that time, they found that something like almost 50% of middle school math teachers had neither a certification to teach math or a degree in math. Almost 90% of the physical science teachers had neither a certification or or degree. So it's good. And my mother, and father were both teachers, and so I'm not criticizing teachers, but if you don't have that core understanding, it's hard to inspire. And so we've set up some programs to try to do that. But let's take it on to the next step and to where you're getting into these stackable credentials. A friend of mine tells a story about how during World War II, when they were training pilots, the very best pilots who wanted to go out there, they wouldn't let them. They had to stay and train the next series of pilots. And then they went out that way. So what is the difficulty to find those trainers now at those skilled levels? And is there a federal, state, local role in that? Carrie, when you're trying to, again, get those skills with public-private partnerships, are you finding that the skilled leaders there are at a level that they can teach the next wave?
I think the answer to that is both yes and no. I think there are teachers who have the absolute capability and the drive and the capacity to do that, but maybe lack the toolkit to do it the most effective way possible. And that's where we would encourage these partnerships to bring projects into the classroom, because fundamentally, the goal that we see of a teacher in the next generation or for the next century is not necessarily teaching kids what to learn or what to think, because let's be honest, a lot of what they learn, a lot of what a college student learns in their first year of college, in this case, is essentially obsolete by the time they graduate. It's been superseded by a new technology. It's been, there's been discoveries since, and it becomes largely obsolete. So if you bring projects into the classroom, you teach kids more about how to think and how to learn and how to pull information. So in that capacity, the teacher becomes more of a facilitator and a conduit to the information, not the sole keeper of the information. And we find that there are many, many teachers out there without necessarily the science skills to inspire a new generation of Albert Einsteins, but they have the capacity and the desire and the drive to draw children to it, to draw their students to it. And if you give them the tools like project-based learning, I think you open up a whole new construct of what skills teachers necessarily need in order to go into a classroom and be ultimately successful.
Yeah, I was reading an article the other day about sort of the new way of education for engineers. And there was this one teacher who puts her classes, she records them, and that's homework. And so, you go home and watch that. When you're in the classroom, you are working on projects and doing things. Deborah, you've been squirming around and writing notes and things here, so I know you've got something to say. So why don't you say it?
Well, one thought that, came to mind when I was listening to my co-panelists is this whole issue of how do we tap in and utilize what increasingly is referred to as the wisdom generation? Because in our society, we have an aging workforce. Fortunately, we have great demographics compared to other developed countries, but there's a whole cadre of people, whether they're in the federal government, in our national labs, and industry, that are beginning to retire, that have tremendous skills and experience. And how do we tap that and get it in the mix of what we're talking about here? And that's something we've been working on at the Council on Competitiveness. We have a project called Tapping Mature Talent. And we've gone around across the country in regions and recognized that whether you're talking about executives all the way down to people who've worked on the factory floor, they want to help. They want to participate in this training challenge and work with young people. So I think we need to have some more, again, partnerships that enable that. Another thing that I would like to mention is the credentialing that's been talked about. We need to have more systemic credentialing of soft skills as well as the hard skills. And I'll just share, one anecdote. I learned this some years ago from a senior executive at Kodak who was telling me that when they shut down a lot of their factories in Australia, they worked with the Department of Labor in Australia to actually go in and create a whole new set of credentials for that workforce. And within 6 months, they were virtually all hired, but in completely different industries, because they captured these intangibles we're talking about, and they had a process for identifying and giving people credit for that. And we don't really do that. And so that's a project, I think, that organized labor, working with management and companies need to do, and it's something that our government could encourage as well. The credentialing of, soft skills that are very, very important for judgment and creativity and the critical thinking that's so part of what we're talking about here for our future.
Stefan, you might want to add to that, and I'll also put another question for you. In the European system, oftentimes there is a double track later on, which puts people on more what you might call a technical course. Any lessons to be learned there, and anything else you want to add to the conversation that we've been having?
Yeah, Europe has been changing on this dimension, but there used to be a very clear double track with an expectation that you'd learn a trade and you'd have immediate skills you can apply in the job market, or go a more academic, university-oriented track, and a relatively early bifurcation, sometimes only a couple of years after elementary school. I think it's helped in terms of getting a real skill base. I mean, you look at, we've done, our Global Institute think tank has done a number of assessments of the productivity of different countries. And one of the things you find, if you look at Germany or Austria, is there's a much larger base of mid-sized companies that really, even in the U.S., make up the bulk of the economy. Actually, most people think about, GE or Boeing or gigantic corporations, but actually the bulk of the economy is these mid-sized companies. The difference in Germany is they have a much higher average skill base. And so they're making machinery equipment, they're doing scientific work, engineering work, because the level of talent they have access to in these mid-sized companies comes directly out of the vocational schools.
And the other interesting thing I think about Germany is that that if you are a company there, you have to join the Chamber of Commerce.
Yeah.
And there really is a partnership between the
That's
Chamber, their government, in training programs to get you ready. So it's and it's paying off now.
That's right. The other thing I was going to add, just picking up on the theme of the quality of the teachers, in the U.S. a lot of the debate is around classroom size and should teachers be unionized or not, and how much funding are we pouring into education. If you look at the stats, we invest more per student than almost every other country on the planet. So it's not about the money, right? And we've done a look, this is a different report, but we've done a look globally at what is the quality of the education system by a whole broad range of metrics, and what are the real drivers of that if you work back to the input factors. It turns out classroom size and how much you invest per student actually doesn't matter. It's not correlated at all with any measure of outcomes. It's the status of the teacher in society, which is what I mentioned earlier. It's what do you draw into the teaching talent pool and when do you get them. So if you look at Finland, the top graduates of high school are invited to go to the top university programs, and then they go directly into the top teaching credential programs. And they take the top off. If you look at where our top students go, right, they go to business school, they go to law school, they become doctors, they don't go back into teaching. I think it's a wonderful idea to try to draw them back at the end of their career to give back into teaching, because that'd be a way to overcome that in the system that we have set up. The last dimension is for teachers actually to have continuous learning. Again, if you go to Singapore or you go to Switzerland or you go to Finland, any of the countries that have a very good educational system, the teachers are in a mutual mentoring continuous education program. It's a routine there for a teacher to sit in the classroom, give coaching and feedback and suggest ideas to another teacher. We don't have any of that concept, and I think this speaks to the public-private partnership, too, of companies actually offering to help bring relevant content, bring relevant expertise into the classroom. So,
well, there is a private sector group called Math for America, a very interesting friend of mine who made a lot of money on Wall Street, but was a mathematician by profession and wanted to give back. And that's much of what they're really honoring those students. They do become mentors for others. When you're with them, it just excites you to see how excited they are about what they're doing. And another, maybe, on the good news front, in the American Competes Act, we recognize that the quickest way to build up this skill level of teachers with background knowledge would be to make that conversion. And so there were some programs set up modeling at the National Science Foundation that hopefully will be extended over into into the states that do try to merge a quick immersion into the education aspect of it as well as the core curriculum part of that. So let me say, is there an epiphany here for anybody, or should we go on to the audience? Okay, we have an epiphany, so Deborah.
I would this is maybe a little trick question, but maybe we could ask, how many people in the room would recommend to their teenage son or daughter that they pursue a career in manufacturing and work in a factory? That's because, that is one of the issues we have, too. That manufacturing is seen as dirty, dumb, dangerous, disappearing, and of course it's not. It's smart, sustainable, safe, it's surging, but just the image of it and how we begin to change that so that young people see this as a very exciting career in these environments that, our whole economy and lifestyle depend on.
I think part of that is a private sector responsibility to get into the schools with our manufacturing executives and others to talk about the opportunities and also for the workers themselves. Well, why don't we turn now to our tweet master and see if we have there. And then we'll follow that by anyone that would have a live question can go ahead and move back to the microphone.
So I have one tweet question. How can short modular education work for students who need to accomplish long-term publishable research in order to be funded?
Let's see. Vaughn, do you want to take that one on? Could you repeat? It was a little echoey here.
Sorry. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. How can short modular education work for students who need to accomplish long-term publishable research in order to be funded?
Those are two different issues in terms of preparing yourself for the workforce versus preparing yourself for your PhD. But you might be a good PhD to write about stackable credentials.
There you go. Well, education institutions are naturally biased towards the long-term degree, so there's already many institutions out there ready to support you if you want to do the PhD, the master's, the full-on degree. I think the topic here is how do you close the skill gap so that the industry gets the skill set it needs, or the skill worker it needs in the shorter time frame, and so that's the relevance of stackable credentials.
I think it's also interesting that most PhD programs don't actually assume that you won't finish the PhD, even though reality is more than half of all PhDs are not finished, right? And so they leave with something that is not actually a useful credential. If it were stackable, even in a PhD, it would be.
Yes, ma'am. Why don't we move to you?
Yes, hi. I'm professor of microelectronic and photovoltaic engineering, and we have been educating students for high-volume manufacturing. In fact, we have a cooperative-based program, BS program. We take students in, and then they go for co-op in the leading semiconductor companies in the actual manufacturing platform, come back, finish their coursework semester after semester. Now, my appeal is to have a program where we can have community college bright students transfer into a program like ours and go for co-op and come back for school and finish their degree. At the same time, they get the cooperative experience actually in the manufacturing platform. So if that kind of investment be made, I think we'll generate a very quick time frame, we'll generate a very good manufacturing workforce.
That's really sort of a core product of the engineering schools, having that co-op period, and certainly that should be able to translate elsewhere. Bart, are you doing any of that with your programs in California?
Well, in my prior capacity, what we offered was in the area of smart grid. We wanted to structure opportunities for actual simulation. Students who are in doctoral or master's program to come to the company and do projects. There's a laundry list of projects that required simulation. And the supervisors, what they wanted to do was actually do an RFP out to these students and say, here's the scope of what we want. And in a 2-month period, how do you or your project team propose to address it? And then it'd be funded by stipend and fellows. So both sides benefited. It supported students in getting some applied simulation experience, and then it helped get some work done for the company. But all sorts of practicum is a good thing.
Anyone else want to comment there?
I would just second what she said regarding the practical learning being a premium. We take a significant number of interns and co-ops into our sites in all different roles, from clerical roles to engineers to lab technicians. So we absolutely see the benefit, and I would just encourage the small and medium-sized companies to also consider the co-op and internship experience as well. I think a lot of times that's considered to be kind of more in the realm of the bigger companies, and I think that there is a lot of benefit to be gained for these students and for small and medium enterprises to take those students in. I think it can be mutually a great experience for companies of any size in order to further their education.
A little different twist to that. In my office, in a congressional office, over the years, and I was there for 26 years, we did very little lateral hiring. And basically what we would do would be we would, get these smart folks coming in, overqualified for what they were doing, and then we would grow them into what we needed. And I think, I would think anyone in the private sector that can find, as you point out, Carrie, a critical thinker, you want to get them. You can teach them the rest of the things, but you need to get that base. Okay, back to our tweet master. Okay, yes, sir. So no tweets, so we're back to the live.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to speak. I've been involved in manufacturing since as a teenager. I completed an apprenticeship as a tool and die maker, and then completed a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, and a PhD, and then spent 26 years teaching at a large private university in manufacturing. And now I'm a research manager at a national laboratory. And from that perspective, let me say just that until we can influence the graduate schools of education who shape how our schools are operated, and until we can influence the teachers' unions that shape how the teachers practice each day, we're not going to address this problem. I mean, we've been taking a run at it for over 100 years. If you go back to Smith-Hughes in 1917 and the Fitzgerald Act in 1937 and all the subsequent legislation over the decades that have taken a run at manufacturing education, you know, we're like time travelers. We're well-intentioned people who've been having this conversation for over a century without moving the needle. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Hello.
Well, that's good.
That's what happens when you're short. Okay. I come at this from the marketing communication side, and I want to talk a little bit about one of the close to the last points about the image problem, if you will, of working in the manufacturing sector. Obviously, those jobs have changed from the dirty fingernails on the factory floor, although having been in the car business, I will tell you that you still get that, but that's another story. So what I'm interested in is, to a certain extent, it's really a marketing communications, a media problem. So what are you, each of you, actively doing to change that image? What are your marketing communication strategies? What stories are you telling, and how are you reaching out to people to change that image and have the manufacturing image be both people who are seeking more vocational training and don't necessarily want to do a 4-year degree, to people who are engineers who are technically in manufacturing but they're also engineers, and get away from the sort of caste system of the white collar, blue collar? What are you actually doing to tell those stories?
Well, I'll say what we're doing at the Council on Competitiveness, and this is on our website. When we released in December our big report that was the culmination of 2 years of effort called Make an American Manufacturing Movement, we very carefully chose the concept of a movement, and we're beginning to galvanize that across the country in some strategic partnerships, particularly in states where there's a core capacity for manufacturing that's now migrating to the higher end, with the governors, with the economic development, the university presidents. I mean, universities and community colleges are a huge part of this, but also just, getting the network built, because manufacturing is far bigger than the factory environment itself. It includes designers. I mean, we're kind of proud of this, the way we designed our report. I mean, we say it's unifying, it's hot, it's thrilling, it's colorful. We put Crayola crayons on the cover. Everyone in the room used Crayolas. Well, they're a high-tech manufacturer, believe it or not, Tabasco. So to change the way people think about it. So, we'd like to have a public service announcement. Some of the TV celebrities get on and talk about it. So we'd love to work with you.
Carrie, I think Carrie had a...
Yeah, Dow is involved in sort of this image piece or perception piece, I think probably more accurately, in a couple of different ways. First, we talk a lot to university students and graduates about sustainability. We find a lot of them really appeal to the environmental and the sustainability aspects of the technologies that we have now. We find that does a lot to change the perception, particularly about the chemical industry in our case, but about manufacturing as a whole, about the energy efficient nature of our sites, the environmental footprint that we're working to reduce and the like. We find that can be an appealing draw to many students. We also kind of one heart at a time change the image of manufacturing through the internships and the co-op programs, through the opportunities we have to send our employees into classrooms, to bring projects to the classrooms, to work one-on-one with teachers. But at probably a higher, kind of more strategic level right now, our engagement with the Advanced Manufacturing Partnership is focused very significantly on the perception piece, and I think we'll see some exciting new aspects come as that report is rolled out in the next few weeks, particularly with regard to the image piece. There's also we recognize the regional aspect of manufacturing, and so, if you think about, an ad council campaign, got manufacturing or whatever, similar to what we see with milk and some of the others, it becomes a bit different because we don't talk about manufacturing the same way in, say, mid-Michigan or in Automation Alley as we do in California or as we do in the South and the Southeast. So there will be, with any of those kinds of image and perception type work, there's work kind of at the national level and at the awareness building level with trade associations and with other pieces. But there's also work to be done at the regional level to make sure that people understand the local flavor and the excitement and the innovation that happens very locally and regionally with the manufacturing base.
Can I just have a quick follow-up to that? Ask unions. There's a perception that manufacturing equals unions, and you have a high unemployment rate right now where you have people who are resistant to maybe get into that. How does that play into this as well?
I can talk about the unions because they're very involved in the Council on Competitiveness. Unions, just like companies and universities, there's not one size that fits all. And some of the unions are very, very progressive in terms of their training, how they work with management and designing programs. For instance, I'll share with you an example at Deere. The CEO and chairman of Deere is the chairman of the Council on Competitiveness, and we were out at Moline, a group of us, and went inside their huge factory where they make these monster harvesters, that you've never seen anything like them. And we had presentations. We had Deputy Secretary Treasurer. It was a very interesting group that was there. No one could tell who was in the union and who was in management. They have blended it together so beautifully in that corporation. That's a model. Now, that doesn't occur in other industrial sectors. So how to begin to replicate those best practices is something that we need to work on. And I'll just share something else with Deere that's very interesting. Deere is kind of iconic American company. And now for these huge pieces of equipment, that are forecasting weather, they have more electronics in them than probably anything. The people who actually make these each sign their name before the piece of equipment goes out to the customer, so that the customer that gets a Deere piece of equipment sees that in addition it has human artisans, the design, and they build that in now, and it's part of their mystique.
Just a quick side note. It's interesting. I was with Walter Isaacson the other day. I've purchased it, but I haven't read it yet, the Steve Jobs book. But in one element of that, he was saying that Steve's father was a, something like, he mechanic.
Car mechanic.
Yeah, he was a car mechanic.
Yeah.
And so, they were painting a fence at their house, and his father had him paint the back of the fence. And he said, "Why don't we paint the back of the fence? We'll never see that." But it was a point of pride. And so later, when he was making the first apples, they brought him in, and all the transistors were scored. They were just going this way and that way, but they worked. And so he made them redo them, and then they all signed their names to this, even though they were built in such a way that you couldn't open them. So it was that that pride, and if you can instill that where the labor feels like they are a part of the company and that their name is on it, then it makes a big difference. Yes, ma'am.
Hi. First a note and then a question. I serve on the U.S. Innovation Advisory Board, actually, with McKinsey. I serve on the U.S. Innovation Advisory Board with McKinsey and Apple and Qualcomm and a couple other big folks. And we actually just released a Compete report, which was called for by Congress as part of our Compete Act. And we work really hard on that, especially in the 10 points at the end, which are very actionable items. So I invite everyone to go ahead to the Department of Commerce, www.competes.gov, and take a look at the report. My first question is, one of the things that we wrestled a lot with was tax incentives. You know, you talked about Singapore, you talked about other countries, and you talked that it only takes about 8% of energy to create, you know, some of the manufacturing. Well, does that matter? And talent. You mentioned talent, too. So these countries, you know, for example, let's say Genentech, they decided they're going to go ahead and invest $1 billion entity out in Singapore because of the incentives that were being given by government, by the tax breaks, by, you know, the amount of skilled labor that was available to them at certain levels and so on. What is it that we can do? I mean, you have here education folks, we have here the companies, and we have here policymakers. What can we do to go ahead and voice that concern or talk about more policies that really will help companies think to, you know, stay here and figure out certain tax breaks, you know, or other incentives for us to do things here? I think that's a really important question that we really need to target.
Well, I'll just share with you what we proposed in the Council on Competitiveness report around the whole capital cost structure. And the President has actually, in the State of the Union, addressed a lot of these issues. But one, of course, is to bring the corporate tax rate down. You know, it is now the second highest in the world. It kind of goes back and forth. The Canadians are now at 15%. But one of the very important recommendations is to move to a territorial tax system, because the taxes on repatriation is a huge deterrent. So, you know, when we did our last index, one of the very important pieces of data we produced is that U.S. companies outside the United States are producing profits 3 times the value of all exports. Now, where does that money go? Where does that revenue go? Well, some of it's invested where their markets are, but a lot of it is not coming back because they've already paid taxes where it's produced, and they're not going to pay double taxation. That's something we need to do. And then, of course, another is around the regulatory environment. You know, for our country to be spending over 2% of GDP on tort payouts is a huge, you know, deterrent. Again, is a company going to put its risky next generation advanced battery plant here when it's got, you know, some of that? So there's a whole set of things we need to address on the tax and the regulatory front. You know, Charleston, North Carolina now, or South Carolina, I think, is having trouble getting the permits now to do the deep dredging so they can compete with the Panama Canal. It's taken them 3 years. They can't get a permit to do the digging.
Oh, I know. And we lost
we
lost a great deal in the Panama Canal. It went to another consortium, and a non-American consortium, because of our lack of, you know, facing these regulatory obstacles. And I think that's the argument, was that when it comes to Congress, we couldn't come straight up and say something like that because it's so divided. So I think that it takes us, the people here, to really go out and, you know, tell Congress this is something that is a huge obstacle we need to go ahead and work on.
Bon, did you want to add to that?
Back when I was in a company, I was less motivated by the employment tax credit as a way to change my behavior in terms of hiring and training. But when I was offered the enticement of, we're willing to fund a certificate, if you can get yourself and your peer companies, which could be your contractors, or for us it was the major utilities of the state, if you could get the 3 to come together and agree on what's your next workforce skill need, we will fund that, the creation of that next certificate. That got my behavior, that got me going to rally the employers to come together and articulate what it was that we needed. So I think there are some tools that are more effective versus perhaps less effective.
Just going to add some examples to illustrate what you were describing, Deborah, right? A lot of this capital sits on balance sheets of corporations that are U.S. companies, but actually, if you literally look where the money is, it's overseas. And so that leads them to reinvest that money overseas because they can't repatriate it. So that means they're building R&D centers, they're building manufacturing plants all overseas because that's where the cash is actually sitting. And they can't move the cash back to the U.S. So for a lot of the clients that I work with, more than half of the amount of money they have on their balance sheet actually sits overseas because more than half of their products are sold overseas, and so that's naturally where the money accumulates. The other part is the liability that you mentioned and the kind of tort level that we have in the U.S., and now I would actually argue also the lawsuits over IP and patents, which are just heating up in more and more industries. We used to have one or two industries that were litigious about patents, and now, the number of people suing Apple, I can't even keep track anymore. But what that means is companies are often not willing to take their product into the U.S. So in the Cleantech space where I do a lot of my work, I see a huge number of products that are actually much more energy efficient, that have been well deployed somewhere overseas, and those companies aren't willing to bring them to the U.S. because of the liability concerns. So it's become a real barrier to adoption of the latest and greatest technology in the U.S. because it's just risky. I'll give you one trivial example. Any of you have been overseas and seen those escalators that slow down when nobody's on them? They can't be sold in the U.S. because there's one liability lawsuit where if you install one of those, you're responsible for anybody that gets hurt on those. Right? So you go to Singapore, you go to China, you go to Europe, all of them have escalators that slow down and don't use energy when nobody's actually trying to get up the escalator. We don't have them in the U.S. You can't find them anywhere.
Well, many of these questions you raise are political of nature, and unfortunately we are at a point in time where we're somewhat dysfunctional in that regard. However, one of the benefits of a presidential election is it becomes a referendum, a national referendum. And so hopefully as we go through this election, we'll find some common denominators. I think everybody knows that the corporate tax rate has got to be changed. And hopefully we'll find those common denominators. We can come out of the election, with at least a period of time there where there is that national referendum. The final comment I would make is you can have all the tax changes, all of the regulatory changes you want, but if you don't have the workforce, it still doesn't matter. So clearly we want to work on these things, but you've got to have the workforce, or why do I build a factory here if there's nobody to work in it? Go right. Oh, I'm sorry, we've got a tweet here.
So the question is, why would U.S. companies not invest in large manufacturing capex if they have a high RR? Are U.S. hurdle rates higher or cost of capital higher? Yeah. Why would U.S. companies not invest in large manufacturing capex if they have a high IRR? And then the second part is, are U.S. hurdle rates higher or is the cost of capital higher?
Stefan, you want to interpret
that? Yeah, sure. Interpret that. The answer varies a lot by industry, so I'll say that as the caveat up front. But in general, you do find that the hurdle rate is higher in the U.S. So you look at a company in China, they're typically measuring market share, and they're measuring cash flow. They're not actually measuring return on invested capital. They have a longer time horizon. Also, the capital in many cases is provided by banks, so is debt capital, which is actually cheaper than equity capital. That's the majority of our funding in the U.S. So that leads to a lower cost of capital and therefore a lower hurdle rate for projects. In terms of why people don't spend as much capex in the U.S., I think a lot of that has been our focus on having very lean companies. Lean both in terms of the labor, where we have a lot of temporary workers. The moment we get a reduction, this is part of our report on what happened in the last downturn, right? We have a much more instant response to lay off workers when our revenue drops in U.S. companies. Whereas a lot of companies overseas will find another way to boost productivity of the company by redeploying those workers or shifting to another task. And the same thing has been the case for our capital equipment, right? We've been on a big wave to outsource anything that requires heavy investment that's a big balance sheet item. And it's because we have a lot of pressure from our Wall Street equity analysts to produce high returns on the capital that's in the company. So that's part of the pressure. Again, it's going to vary widely by industry, but you do find overseas companies are much more willing to invest capital. They do have a longer time horizon. And in many cases, even I mentioned the example of Germany. Again, most of the capital for German mid-sized companies is actually bank financed. So then you're talking about 4 to 7% interest, rather than in the U.S. for debt capital we typically expect 11, 10, 12% return, something in that neighborhood. Does that make sense of all the?
I think you can sum it up by saying quarterly reports and anxious boards. Yes.
Hi, my name is John Baggiano. I'm one of the founders of everblue.edu, which is a professional education-focused and corporate education-focused school, and we do mostly all short-term programs. We actually partner with about 60 community colleges and unions to deliver a lot of these programs. And two challenges, and one question for the Chancellor, two challenges that I would agree with are the marketing side of things. Students will call us and say, I want to get into solar, because that's all they ever see marketed, and they see it's really sexy, and they don't understand that there's this whole other world of needed skills, but because all they've been marketed to is solar is clean energy, solar is, and that's, but there's, in our viewpoint, there's not a lot of jobs in solar specifically, but there is a world of engineering jobs. And then the second, one other challenge before my question would be the community colleges. The reason they partner with us is, one, on the technical curriculum and so they can get an instructor short term, but the viability of these programs, you get it up and running, but then the instructor leaves, you don't have a skill set to fill in. And then the marketing side, when students call the community colleges, the community colleges nationwide haven't geared around continuing education. They're geared around 4-year degrees, and even trying to get registered at some community colleges for a shorter-term program is a challenge. Just getting a knowledgeable person at a community college that understands the technical aspects can be challenging. And so with that, I love the stackable skills. We've heard talk about that, because in California, you may have a 9-month program that gives you a certificate, and a title in North Carolina is the exact same program, but it's 2 weeks. And so is there any move towards a national benchmark? Everybody goes to a 2 or 4-year degree, you know the length, there's accreditation standards around that. But what about this lifelong learning concept, and kind of putting some terminology that you could say, well, this is the value of it, and it's not the same as somebody who got a 2-week program or a 2-day program? Any thoughts, Chancellor?
So the energy industry, as well as the manufacturing industry, has done a lot of groundwork to lay out a competency model. And it's, again, tiering levels of competencies that you should be building or stacking. And at the bottom layers are what would be regarded as career readiness skills. So this assumption that you have the academic, you have the soft skills, you have the problem-solving skills, or the computer skills, baseline skills to get started. And there's a convergence on a battery of tests called the work keys. So you know how you take ACT or SAT to get into college. There's the work keys can actually profile a job and say, for the incumbents who are doing this job, what is the skill level they need? And then you can see where, if this person has met that threshold to be competitive or be able to acquire the specific skills. And then above this, the model lays out, okay, so you have career readiness skills, and then above that you have industry general skills, for example, like safety. And then on top of that is industry-specific skills, for example, nuclear safety. And then on top of that is occupational general, like storage technology, and specific like lithium ion or whatever was discussed in the prior workshop. So there's an approach that the industries are beginning to take, and it is very powerful that if as an employer, if you listed the credentials that are recommended by the trade association, you would immediately change the behavior of the education institution. The moment you put it on your job description, either as a required skill, or a required qualification, or a desired qualification, education institutions will begin to change the content of their curriculum to align with the skill sets that you need. So there's a momentum right now for education to deliver on industry responsive credentials, but I think the one step that we're missing right now is for actually employers to put down, we want this following credential on there, and that would get wholesale behavioral change.
I would agree that a system like that would allow companies to know they're investing in education that means something, and employees to say, I can take this from California to Arizona and it's still worth something. And so I agree, and I think that would enhance investment in education to have something that's nationwide and kind of the same benchmark for that lifelong learning approach. Thank you, Chancellor.
Well, I have to say, I think there's some level of national uniformity, but to a great extent, universities and community colleges now, they are in competition for students, and they are looking for those kinds of partnerships. And so really it is the local industries that are saying, this is what I need. Put a program together for it. So, there probably needs to be a combination of some base, maybe certification that you can take wherever you go, but still ultimately, I think it's going to be those businesses, companies in the area near the educational institution that's going to try to not dictate, but suggest what the needs are. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Shrey Debay. I'm from MIT.
Closer.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
My name is Shrey. I'm from MIT, and I first of all wanted to thank you. This has been really good, and it's really nice to hear all the efforts and engagements in education from all sorts of areas. Wanted to ask you what you thought what, if any, the role of ARPA-E is in STEM education, in training the workforce, and in maybe changing images or whatever else, just anything.
Inspiration.
Thank you.
I mean, when I say inspiration, can you imagine those folks that were at DARPA that were there when, Vince Cerf is here today, when the internet was being developed, and it was 10 years later or some bit later that they're seeing this, sort of start to change the world, or GPS, or whatever it might be, and how, excited they have to be to see those things, go from the lab to commercial. I think ARPA-E is going to change our life. We're going to have energy internets that will inspire folks, just like NASA. When it was after the Sputnik went up that our country's response was to create DARPA, the Science and Technology Committee in the United States Congress, and as well as DARPA. And if you weren't there, you can't really, I guess since I'm a blonde, I know a little bit more about that than a lot of you do. But I remember when when Sputnik went over, we used to go out in the backyard and we would see this red blink, blink, blink go across the sky. And it frightened us. It frightened us both in terms of do they have some technological advantage that they're going to use on us for our national security? And the other thing is, we thought we were the cock of the walk, and here we see that somebody else is doing something better than we were. So it inspired that whole generation to go into these type of areas. And so I think once we see some of the breakthroughs that are going to come from ARPA-E, it's going to also be an inspiration. We just need to inspire pretty soon. We don't need to be waiting too much longer. Anyone else want to have something for the? Well, okay, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Karina Edmonds, a Tech Transfer Coordinator for the Department of Energy, and I just wanted to make a comment that hasn't really been articulated, but I think is where we're headed, and it's that link between innovation and manufacturing, and how unless we can keep a strong manufacturing base here in the U.S., our innovation advantage is going to leave with us, because there's many studies that show that innovation will follow the manufacturing. And so we're going to innovate where we're close to where we're manufacturing, and just the importance of ensuring that we have a strong manufacturing base here, and it's not just about job security, but it's about our innovation and keeping that innovation lead. So just want to make that comment, and thank you all for your time and the valuable comments you made today.
Katrina, it's important to all of us because, we have, when I say we as taxpayers, our federal government has spent a lot of money over the years in terms of research to the universities, through our national labs, and there's a lot of technology that is hostage there, that's on the shelf. We got to get it out. And that's part of Katrina's job, is to get that technology, out and into the public domain. And I think she's going to be successful, and we're going to be a better country for it. Anyone have any final?
I was just going to comment on that, which is I think that's the real missing piece in our emphasis in our economy, right? Because we do pretty well on the innovation side. We actually have a lot of great innovators. We have a lot of companies start up. And if you look at areas where it's not $2 an hour labor dependent, we actually do quite well on the manufacturing side. And there are very interesting manufacturing industries in the U.S. But where we lack is in the guts to really deploy new technologies. We used to be the country that adopted things first. You look at a lot of the innovations. 100 years ago, when the power grid was first, we had the first street lights, we had the first generators, we had the first appliances, right? We were early in the automobiles. We're not doing that now. If you look at solar panels are being installed in China and in Germany and in India more than they are here, right? So we're not the early adopters of that technology. You look at LED lights, we actually have people in Congress trying to take us back to incandescent bulbs when more energy efficient and much prettier light LED bulbs are now available. I don't understand that. I don't understand how one of our parties somehow got against science, but that's a separate topic. But that's the guts we have to have on the deployment of these technologies that we've innovated. And the solar shingles are a perfect example, right? Right now, probably you'll wind up having to install them somewhere in Europe or somewhere in Asia, because that's where people are really making the big bets on adopting new technologies. And that's the missing piece that would tie ARPA-E into the really large-scale deployment that would then generate the jobs that we need. Because it isn't just from the research that's going to keep a handful of people busy. It's actually going to be the deployment that really creates the industry change and creates the productivity effects for the whole economy.
I'll just jump in and add to what you're saying, and Karina's comment was so important. This whole linkage of next-generation innovation and the manufacturing enterprise is huge. And we can go down the list. Flat panel displays is one where we invented every single technology path. They were all further developed next generation in Asia because we didn't make them. And it's interesting, in northeastern Ohio right now, they have a very exciting manufacturing cluster underway in what they're calling flexible electronics, the new language for that. But they're really determined this time, and they're working with big corporations as well as the startups not to repeat that. And I'm very concerned that in the energy space, we're seeing many companies, very innovative ones, that once they reach 50 million in sales, they're going to Asia, and the innovation will go with them. So my final thought would be, whether we're talking about workforce or how we use our great unmatched tools like modeling and simulation and our supercomputing, let's start thinking a little bigger than these little incremental steps. We need to do some big things at scale, and ARPA-E really has the potential to help that scale issue along.
Well, now that I'm not on the ballot any longer, I can use the T word. And when you're talking about first to market, there's really two ways to do that. One is there has to be some type of federal motivation. A carbon tax is why you're seeing much of it go on elsewhere. Or you're going to have to deal with quarterly reports. We become hostage to quarterly reports in that our CEOs anyone will tell you that if they can't get a return in 2 or on the outside 3 years, they can't make that they can't make the business case to make that investment. Now, some of the good firms, Dow and others, have a little pot of money over at the side that they do allow some of the longer term research. But either you have to have a longer corporate view, or you're going to have some type of, if you want to call it, a federal policy that is a motivator, or hopefully, a small combination of both.
Yeah, I think the other thing I would point out is we think of motivators usually as subsidies or as taxes. They don't have to be, right? We are just afraid to set standards in many areas, and standards can actually be a way to reduce the cost for people and at the same time create a market, because the deployment that I talked about is really demand creation. One of the ways government can create demand is to set a standard that requires a certain minimum. And if you look at California is a really good example with Title 24 and what they've done in appliances. They just set a standard that actually made it cheaper for everybody to manufacture because it was a single coherent standard that everybody had to meet. And that created a much larger market for them. The whole EU, the principle of the market, even though it's not working with Greece right now, but the principle was to create a much larger market on the same standards, because each country actually had different set of standards up until now. But we've become a little bit shy about setting standards in many of these areas because it's seen as somehow an unnatural intervention in the market. I don't understand that.
Well, through our committee, we really charged the Department of Energy to set a number of standards. It went on and on and on. Unfortunately, with too many of them. But we found when you involved the industry, the lighting industry, or whatever it might be, then you get something that's more constructive, and quite frankly, then it gets it. You get more new refrigerators, or there's something, or more new types of lights that can turn over. So if we can do it in that constructive way, where there is, again, the public-private sector coming together, establishing standards that can be beneficial for all, we certainly have seen that benefit. Vaughn, did you?
Yeah, I think it's well, you talk about carbon tax. As we set the policies or we facilitate the market by giving market certainty through the policies, I would like to encourage us not to underestimate the need to pre-think the workforce element. So, for example, in California, there's going to be about 600 companies that's going to be in the penalty box as a result of their carbon emissions. But then what was learned in Australia that once the regulators determined this, that the companies didn't know what to do. Like, how do we measure our carbon? How do we approach the reduction? So then there became a need for a carbon manager type of skill set. So not a brand new classification, but you take your people who are in charge of risk or in charge of facilities, and you actually need to upskill them to understand this new world as a result of all these new technologies. And you can't do this, as Cheryl was saying, in a crisis and an emergency. So if you can pre-think where you're going to be and what kind of skills you need, what's the right skill at the right time, I would encourage everyone to work early with your education institutions so that you can get the right skill sets.
All good things have to come to an end, but not until after this lady has a chance to make her case.
Thank you so much. Yes, just to jump into this discussion about deployment, I think deployment is so critical, and manufacturing as a component of deployment, and stepping back, innovation in manufacturing as a component is really key. For my master's thesis in international law, I looked at feed-in tariff policies in Germany and other countries, and how those were utilized to help create a level playing field for different types of renewable technologies to come to the market. And so it was a fixed price, long-term sort of offering for renewables that comprehended the capital cost, the disparities in capital cost. And what was found really interesting was that the feed-in tariff put the pressure on the manufacturers to innovate. So you didn't have wind price competing against a solar price, which are different technologies. What you had was, the solar manufacturers had to compete with one another. The generation was all going to be at the same price. But that was where the innovation was spurred and created in manufacturing. So it was really interesting to see how that policy in particular kind of spurred innovation in manufacturing.
Thank you. I think I assume most everyone is here because they are a fan of ARPA-E, and if they didn't come in as one, you're going to hopefully leave as one. So I want to anoint all of you as ambassadors. There is this, I think among many of us, we think ARPA-E is important and it's going to be around forever. It is very, very fragile. I can point to you on a number of occasions where one vote out of 435 could have meant that ARPA-E would be dead now. 1 year that ARPA-E is not funded will mean that you can't put Humpty Dumpty back together again, because ARPA-E really is about people. And they're giving up jobs elsewhere to come in. If they don't have the programs, then they're going to leave, and you cannot put this is a magical thing that came together because of those early people. So please, you know that you are now official ambassadors, and that you should spread the word to all, and then you'll see ARPA-E again reward you by changing you and your family's lives. So thank you all for coming. I was going to say let's applaud this good panel, but instead I want the panel to applaud this good crowd. Thank you for being here.